The dirt road ends long before the house begins. Out here, folks say the pines grow so thick the sun gives up trying to reach the ground, and the creeks run black even at noon. This is the kind of place where screams don't echo, they just sink into the moss and stay there. In the winter of 1987, a 15-year-old girl named Lila Mae disappeared from one of those hollowed-out farms that don't even have numbers, just a rusted mailbox leaning like it's tired of holding secrets. Most runaways leave a note, a slammed door, something. Lila Mae left nothing. No coat. No shoes. Just a single drop of blood frozen on the porch plank that nobody noticed until spring. The sheriff called it a runaway. Her father stood on that same porch, Bible in hand, telling anyone who'd listen that his daughter had the devil in her and the hills had finally claimed what was theirs. He cried just hard enough for people to look away. But Lila Mae wasn't running from the law, or from poverty, or from the meth that was already crawling through those mountains like kudzu. She was running because her belly was starting to swell under her flannel shirt, and the child inside her had her eyes, and her father's hands. She knew what he'd do when the morning sickness gave her away. She'd already felt the weight of his fists teaching her what silence cost. So one night when the wind sounded like a woman screaming miles off, she waited until his snores rattled the thin walls, slipped past her mother who wouldn't meet her eyes, and walked straight into the darkness barefoot. She walked until the blood from her torn soles left a trail even the dogs wouldn't follow. 32 years later, in a fluorescent county clinic 2 ridges away, a young man spat into a plastic tube for a cheap ancestry kit. When the results loaded, the nurse went pale and called the sheriff. Because the DNA didn't just find cousins. It found a father who had never been reported as one. And a missing girl whose case file still sat in a cardboard box labeled inactive, probable runaway. They say when the detectives finally pushed open the door of that same rotting house in 2019, the old man was waiting. Skin like wet paper, oxygen hissing through a tube, but his eyes still sharp as the knife he once held to his daughter's throat. He smiled when they read him his rights. Then he asked for the recorder. And for the next 47 minutes, he told them exactly where Lila Mae had hidden the afterbirth in the snow, how loud she screamed when the baby crowned, and why he kept her little pink diary in a coffee can under his bed all those years. He died before sunrise. They say the last thing he whispered was her name, like a prayer, like a curse. What happened to Lila Mae and the child she carried into those black pines? Most folks out here will tell you the mountains keep what they take. But some nights, when the fog sits heavy in the hollers, you can still hear a woman singing an old lullaby with no words, just a low, heartbroken hum that makes the dogs refuse to cross certain creeks. And if you listen close enough, you'll realize the lullaby has 2 voices. One older. One forever 15. The winter of 1987 came early to the little scrap of land the family called home, a sagging 2-room house with tar paper walls and a tiny roof that leaked like a sieve whenever the wind shifted north. Lila Mae was 15, all elbows and knees, with pale hair that never quite lay flat and eyes the color of creek water after a hard rain. She had stopped going to school the year before. Her father said the roads were too bad and the teachers were all gossips anyway. So she stayed inside, chopping kindling, feeding the hogs, scrubbing clothes on a washboard until her knuckles bled in the cold. It started the way these things always do, small, quiet, disguised as something else. A hand lingering too long on her shoulder while he showed her how to sight down a rifle barrel. A door that no longer closed all the way when she bathed in the tin tub behind the curtain. Whispers in the dark that she told herself were dreams until she woke with the weight of him on her chest and the taste of his skin still in her mouth. By October the bleeding had stopped. She waited another month, praying to a god she wasn't sure lived in these hills anymore, counting days on the inside of a feed sack with a stolen pencil stub. When the nausea came every dawn and the smell of frying fat sent her retching behind the smokehouse, she knew. She pressed her palms against the faint, impossible curve low in her belly and felt the truth settle there like a stone. Her father noticed the same week. She saw it in the way his gaze slid over her body now, proprietary, satisfied, hungry all over again. He started locking the bedroom door from the inside when he came in from the fields, humming old hymns under his breath while the mattress springs sang their familiar, sickening song. He told her the Lord had given her a special purpose, that this was their secret covenant, That blood stayed with blood out here where no one else could understand. She tried once to tell her mother. Caught her alone at the stove, voice barely louder than the crackle of lard, and watched the older woman's face go still as creek ice. Her mother stirred the beans harder, eyes fixed on the pot, and said only, "Some things is between a man and his house. You mind your tongue, girl." That night the strap came out for the first time in years, and Lila Mae learned that silence had a price heavier than shame. So she carried it alone, the nausea, the terror, the weight that grew inside her like a second darkness. She learned to move carefully, to breathe shallow, to smile when he looked at her too long. Every morning she stared out the cracked window at the endless ridges of pine and tried to imagine walking into them and never stopping. Every night she lay rigid beside the wall, counting heartbeats, hers, his, and the tiny third one fluttering against her ribs like a trapped moth, waiting for the moment when the knowing would finally show. The kitchen smelled of coal oil and pinto beans left too long on the stove. Lila Mae stood in the doorway with her arms wrapped around her middle, trying to hide the slight roundness that had only just begun to push against the waistband of her skirt. Her mother, Cora, stood over the cookstove, back turned, wooden spoon moving in slow circles like she could stir the whole day away. Lila Mae's mouth went dry. She had practiced the words in her head for weeks, whispered them to the hogs, to the wind, to the dark when her father's breathing finally evened out beside her. She stepped forward, bare feet silent on the cold linoleum her mother had saved green stamps for 10 years to buy. "Mama," she said, so soft it barely left her throat. Cora didn't turn. The spoon kept moving. "Mama, I'm in a family way." The spoon stopped. For one heartbeat, the only sound was the tick of the battery clock above the sink and the low moan of wind under the eaves. Then Cora spoke without looking up. "You sure?" Lila Mae nodded, even though her mother couldn't see it. "Yes, 2 months gone, maybe 3. The silence stretched so long Lila Mae felt it pressing against her eardrums. She watched her mother's shoulders rise and fall once, twice, like she was breathing for both of them. It's him, ain't it?" Cora's voice came out flat, scraped raw. Lila Mae couldn't answer. The shame was a living thing crawling up her neck. She managed a tiny nod. Cora set the spoon down. Clink. Metal on cast iron. She wiped her hands on the apron that used to be feedsack flour, the one with little blue flowers Lila Mae had loved when she was small. When she finally turned, her face was the color of tallow. "You listen to me good, girl." The words were low, almost gentle, which somehow made them worse. "Your daddy's got the devil riding him some nights, I know that. I seen the marks. But out here a woman don't get to choose her crosses. She just carries 'em." Lila Mae's knees started shaking. "He'll kill me when it shows. Or he'll kill the baby. Mama, please." Cora stepped close enough that Lila Mae could smell the snuff on her breath. "You breathe a word of this to anybody, preacher, sheriff, neighbor, anybody, and he'll kill us both. And then who feeds your brothers? Who keeps a roof over their heads when the state comes sniffing? You want them split up in foster homes worse than this?" Tears burned Lila Mae's eyes. "I can't stay." "You will stay." Cora's hand shot out and gripped Lila Mae's chin hard enough to bruise. "You'll smile at the table. You'll keep your dresses loose. You'll tell folks it was some boy from the ridge you met at the creek. And when the time comes you'll go out to the old carving shed like I did twice myself, and you'll do what needs doing quiet." Lila Mae tried to pull away, but her mother held tighter. "Blood keeps its own counsel," Cora whispered, eyes shining with something that wasn't quite tears. "That's how we survive these hills. That's how we always have." The beating came 3 nights later, sudden as a summer storm. Lila Mae had fallen asleep waiting for him to come in from the porch, where he sat cleaning his shotgun and drinking something clear out of a mason jar. She woke to the door banging open so hard it cracked against the wall and to his shadow filling the doorway like something poured out of the dark itself. He didn't speak at first. Just stood there breathing through his nose, heavy, the way a bull does when it smells blood. The lantern on the nail threw his face into pieces, eyes black holes, mouth a wet slash. She smelled the moonshine on him, sharp and sweet, mixed with the gun oil on his fingers. "You been talking," he said at last. Voice low, almost tender. I can always tell when you been talking. Lila Mae scrambled back against the headboard, knees to chest. I never, Daddy, I swear. The first blow was open-handed across her face, hard enough to split her lip and fill her mouth with copper. The second was the back of his hand, knuckles this time, catching her cheekbone and snapping her head sideways into the iron rail. Stars burst behind her eyes. He dragged her off the mattress by her hair, strands ripping free with a sound like tearing cloth. She tried to scream, but he clamped one hand over her mouth and nose until the room went grey at the edges. You think I don't hear every word in this house? He hissed, close enough she felt the heat of his skin. You think your mama don't tell me what needs telling? He hauled her across the floor, her nightgown bunching under her arms, skin scraping raw on the rough boards. The trapdoor to the root cellar stood open. He must have opened it earlier, planning this. Cold, damp air rolled up like breath from a grave. She clawed at his wrists, kicked, tried to dig her heels into the floor. He kneed her in the belly, not hard enough to kill what was growing there, just hard enough to fold her in half and drive the air from her lungs. Down the narrow steps he dragged her, her spine knocking every tread. The cellar was blacker than any night she'd ever known, thick with the smell of potatoes gone soft and the sour earth itself. He threw her into the far corner where the dirt was coldest and chained her ankle to the iron ring he'd bolted into the foundation years ago for hogs that got too mean. Then he crouched, lantern in one hand, the other stroking her hair like she was a frightened dog. You stay down here till you remember who you belong to, he said. Till you remember what happens to girls who forget. He set the lantern just out of reach so the light barely touched her, left the trapdoor open a finger's width so she could hear them moving around upstairs, her mother's footsteps, deliberate and slow, the scrape of a chair, the ordinary sounds of a house that had already decided to look the other way. For 4 days he left her there with nothing but a tin cup of water and a crust of cornbread when he felt generous. The chain was short enough she couldn't lie flat. The dark pressed in until she couldn't tell if her eyes were open or closed. On the 4th night he came down with the Bible under his arm and read her passages about obedient daughters and the sins of the tongue while the lantern flame danced across his smile. When he finished he leaned close, breath hot against her ear. You tell a single soul what's in that belly, he whispered, and I'll cut it out myself and feed it to the dogs while you watch. Then I'll bury what's left of you where the hogs root deepest. Ain't nobody ever gonna find enough to pray over. He kissed her forehead the way he used to when she was little and had nightmares, gentle as anything, before he climbed back up and dropped the trapdoor shut. The darkness that followed was absolute. November the 17th, 1987, the night the temperature dropped hard enough to split trees. Lila Mae had been let up from the cellar that morning, weak and stinking, skin mottled with bruises the color of storm clouds. He had watched her every move all day, sitting at the kitchen table with the shotgun across his knees, sipping coffee gone cold. Her mother moved around them like a ghost, eyes on the floor, humming something tuneless under her breath. When the wind started screaming through the eaves after supper, he finally drank himself into the front room chair, bottle cradled against his chest like a baby. She waited, counting heartbeats the way she had in the dark, until his snores rattled the windows and the fire burned down to nothing but red eyes. She moved without thinking now, the way a wounded animal finally bolts. Bare feet on cold boards, she eased open the drawer where he kept the church money. Inside the cracked leather Bible, the one he thumped every Sunday whether they made it to preaching or not, lay a thin fold of bills held together with a dried-up rubber band. $23. All ones and fives, offering money, tithes from neighbors too poor to notice it missing. She took it without guilt. Blood money deserved blood money. No coat, hers had vanished days ago, punishment for some forgotten sin. No shoes, he'd thrown those into the burn barrel after the cellar. Just the thin cotton dress she'd worn for a week and the wool socks with holes in both heels. She slipped out the back door, the one that stuck and groaned, but the wind swallowed the sound. The cold hit her like a slap, sharp enough to steal the breath she'd been holding for days. Frost silvered the grass, and every step cracked like breaking bones. She didn't look back at the yellow square of window where her mother might be standing, might be watching, might already be turning away. She followed the hog path down the ridge, briars snatching at her legs, drawing fresh lines of blood that froze before they could drip. The money and the Bible page she'd torn out, Leviticus 18, The verses he skipped when he read aloud were clenched in her fist so tight the edges cut. When she reached the creek she waded straight in, gasping as the water stabbed up to her knees, because dogs track scent and cold water kills it. She stayed in the stream until her feet went numb and the moon slid behind the ridge, then climbed out on the far side and kept moving south, toward the deepest hollers where even the revenue men feared to go. Behind her, the house was already shrinking, just another dark shape among darker trees. She didn't cry. There wasn't time. The wind carried the faint smell of wood smoke and something metallic, her own blood, maybe, or the promise of more to come. She was 15 years old, 4 months pregnant, barefoot, and $23 richer than she had been an hour ago. The mountains opened in front of her like a mouth. She walked straight into it. The first ride came at dawn, a rusted Ford pickup rattling along the gravel like loose bones. The driver, an old man with a face folded into 1,000 creases and a beard the color of dirty sheep wool, slowed when he saw the girl standing at the edge of the road, arms wrapped around herself, lips blue, blood-crusted black on her bare feet. He didn't ask where her shoes were. He just leaned across and pushed the door open with one gnarled hand. Lila Mae climbed in without a word. The cab smelled of wood smoke, Prince Albert tobacco, and something sharp and illegal cooking in jars under the seat. Heat blasted from a vent held together with baling wire, and she pressed her frozen hands to it until the pain brought tears she refused to let fall. They rode in silence for 20 miles of switchbacks. Every time the truck lurched, her stomach lurched harder, morning sickness riding shotgun now. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft as leaf mold. "You in trouble, ain't you, gal?" She stared straight ahead at the cracked windshield and nodded once. He spat out the window. "Figured. You bleed on my seat, you clean it." She looked down, tiny red smears where her feet had rested. She tore a strip from the hem of her dress and wiped them away. He dropped her at a crossroads store with a single gas pump and a Pepsi sign swinging crooked. She thought that was the end of him, but 2 nights later he found her again, huddled behind the dumpster eating saltines she'd stolen from the shelf when the clerk turned his back. He didn't say her name, he never learned it, and she never learned his, though she heard folks call him Uncle Birch. He just opened the passenger door of the same truck and jerked his chin. "My woman'll feed you. Then you'll be gone 4 questions get asked." The cabin sat so deep in a laurel slick the sun only found it an hour a day. His wife, Eula, was all bone and sinew, eyes milky with cataracts, hands that shook when she poured coffee but could still skin a squirrel faster than any man. They gave Lila Mae a pallet by the cookstove, a pair of boys' boots 2 sizes too big, and a jar of thick salve that smelled like pine tar and sorrow. They never asked who, never asked why. When her belly began to show they simply moved her pallet to the loft where the heat rose and the questions couldn't. Eula taught her to set traps, to read weather in the clouds, to chew sassafras root when the nausea got bad. Birch brought her jars of clear liquor he called mountain medicine and told her it would keep the baby small enough to birth without splitting her in 2. Some nights she woke to find Eula sitting beside her, rocking slow, humming the same hymn her father used to scream when he was drunk. The old woman's hand would rest on the hard curve of Lila Mae's stomach, feeling the kicks, and her lips would move soundless, like she was praying for both of them or cursing them. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. They kept her 4 months, maybe 5. Long enough for the snow to melt and the dogwoods to bleed pink against the ridges. Long enough for her to learn that some doors close behind you gentle and never open again. March came in like a lion with teeth. The old couple woke one morning to find Lila Mae gone, pallet cold, boots missing, only a scrap of paper under the coffee cup that read "I can't bring him here. Thank you for the kindness." She walked until the road turned to wagon track and the track turned to nothing, following a deer path that switchbacked higher into the Boston Mountains where even Birch said the bears still owned the night. Her belly was huge now, riding low and hard, the baby kicking so fierce she had to stop every few minutes and lean against a tree while the pain rolled through her like distant thunder. She found the hunting cabin by accident, half collapsed against a limestone bluff, boards silvered gray and the tin roof peeled back like the lid of a sardine can. Inside smelled of mouse nests and old gunpowder, but the floor was dry and one window still held a shard of glass that caught the last light like a broken mirror. She dragged pine boughs in for a bed and hung a scrap of blanket over the door to keep the wind from cutting her in half. The blizzard hit 3 nights later, the kind that buries fence posts and makes widows before morning. Snow sifted through every crack, piling on her chest while she slept. The pain started just after moonset, low in her back at first, then gripping the whole bottom of her belly like a fist closing slow. She built the fire as high as she dared, feeding it splintered chair legs and pages torn from a 1972 Sears catalog she found under the bunk. When the water broke, it steamed on the cold floorboards. She screamed once, a sound swallowed whole by the storm, then bit down on the sleeve of Birch's old coat until the flannel shredded. Hours bled together. She crawled on hands and knees from fire to pine bed and back again, pushing when the urge came, sobbing when it left. Blood slicked her thighs, froze in streaks on the planks. At one point she thought she heard her father's voice in the wind, calling her name the way he did when he was hunting her, rifle raised. The baby crowned just before false dawn, a dark crown of hair against the impossible white outside. She bore down with everything left in her ruined body and felt the shoulders turn, the wet slide, the sudden terrifying emptiness. The child slipped free into her waiting hands, blue and silent, cord pulsing like a purple snake. She rubbed the tiny chest with the hem of her dress, blew breath into the slack mouth the way Eula had once shown her with a stillborn litter of pups. Seconds stretched into forever. Then the baby coughed, a small wet sound, and dragged in air that turned into a cry so thin it barely cut the roar of the storm. Lila Mae pulled the child to her breast, cord still connecting them, and stared into eyes the exact color of creek water after rain. The blizzard kept raging, sealing them inside a world that had shrunk to firelight and heartbeat and the copper smell of birth. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing every track she had ever made. The years folded themselves quiet and small, the way mountains do when you live inside them long enough. Lila Mae never left the deep hollers again. She moved from cabin to cabin like a wounded thing that learns to drag its pain behind it, trading labor for silence, chopping kindling for widows, picking ginseng with men who spoke only in grunts, burying herself deeper each season until even the oldest locals forgot the pale woman and her dark-haired boy were strangers. She called herself Ruth now, a Bible name no one questioned, and the boy she named Jonah because the preacher on the scratchy AM radio once said Jonah ran from God and lived to tell it. She never let Jonah cut his hair short. The curls hid the shape of his ears, the one part of his face she couldn't look at without tasting bile. They lived on what the ridge gave, poke salad and squirrel, blackberries thick as blood clots, the occasional ham traded for mending clothes or pulling teeth with pliers boiled in creek water. She taught him to read with a waterlogged Gideon Bible and pages torn from seed catalogs, taught him to walk soft and speak softer, taught him that some questions were poison and some doors were forever nailed shut. Every autumn when the hounds ran the ridges chasing bear, she kept Jonah inside for days, curtains drawn, rifle loaded with the single box of shells she'd carried out of Birch's cabin all those years ago. She told him it was because of snares, or copperheads, or the devil himself riding the wind. He learned not to ask why her hands shook when the dogs bayed too close. At night she rocked him long after he outgrew rocking, humming the same broken lullaby Eula had hummed, listening for footsteps that never quite came. Some mornings she woke with her throat raw from screaming in dreams where her father stood at the foot of the bed, older now, smiling the same smile he wore when he locked the cellar door. Jonah grew tall and quiet, with a stillness that made strangers uneasy. He never asked who his daddy was. The one time he started the question she slapped him so hard his lip split, then held him while they both cried until the fire burned cold. After that the subject stayed buried deeper than any grave. She watched the roads anyway. Every rusted truck that crawled the gravel made her heart stop until she saw it wasn't the one she still saw in nightmares. She aged fast, hair going grey at the temples before 35, eyes sinking into bruises that never quite healed. Yet the mountains kept them. The laurel thickets closed behind them like water. The creeks ran too loud for voices to carry far. And the secret, monstrous and breathing, grew up right alongside the boy, hidden in plain sight among people who had long ago learned that looking too hard at someone else's shadows only invited your own to be seen. June 2019 smelled like cut hay and diesel at the county health fair set up under a white tent in the parking lot of the old Kmart. Jonah was 31 now, lean and sunburned from laying shingles on rich folks' lake houses, the kind of quiet man women noticed and men trusted without knowing why. He only went because the Lions Club was giving away free sunglasses and Ruth had been coughing blood into rags she thought he didn't see. The genealogy booth was a folding table manned by a retired schoolteacher with a laptop and a stack of cheek swab kits left over from some grant. Jonah signed up on a whim, mostly to kill time while the nurse drew Ruth's blood in the next tent over. He rubbed the swab inside his cheek, dropped it in the little plastic tube, and forgot about it by the time he carried 2 sweet teas back to where his mother waited, pale as milk under the fluorescent lights. 6 weeks later the email came while he was on a roof in Branson, phone buzzing against his chest. The subject line was innocent enough. Your ancestry results are ready. He clicked it during lunch break, sitting on a stack of shingles with the lake glittering below like broken glass. The little spinning wheel stopped on a page that made no sense at first. No matches on the maternal side past 1 generation. On the paternal side, a single hit, 50% shared DNA, labeled parent-child relationship, confirmed. The name attached was his own grandfather, a man Jonah had never met, listed as living at the same rusted mailbox address Ruth had once made him swear never to go near. He stared so long the screen went dark. When it woke again the words hadn't changed. That night he showed Ruth the printout. She read it once, slow, lips moving over the clinical phrases, then folded the paper into a square so small it disappeared in her fist. She didn't cry. She walked out back to the burn barrel, struck a match, and watched every corner curl black before she spoke. Some doors, she said to the flames, you think you nailed shut. Turns out they was only waiting. 2 days later the sheriff's cruiser crawled up their gravel like a black beetle. Jonah met them on the porch with the shotgun across his knees the way his mother taught him when he was 10. The deputies didn't draw, they just handed him a thick folder stamped missing person, 1987, and asked if Miss Lila Mae Carver was inside. Ruth stepped out then, 32 years older than the grainy school photo on the cover, but the eyes were the same creekwater gray. She looked at the deputies, at the folder, at her son who was staring at her like she was a stranger wearing his mother's skin. Reckon you best come in, she said, voice steady as creek stone. Coffee's fresh, and the story's long overdue. The drive back to the old home place took 43 minutes on roads that had been gravel in 1987 and were barely paved now. Ruth, Lila Mae again in the eyes of the law, sat in the backseat of the cruiser between Jonah and a young deputy who kept stealing glances at the woman whose missing person poster had yellowed on the sheriff's wall longer than he'd been alive. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the tick-tick-tick of the turn signal when they crossed the creek bridge she once waded barefoot and pregnant. The house looked smaller than memory, half swallowed by kudzu and honeysuckle, the tin roof rusted the color of dried blood. The front porch sagged so bad the floorboards had rotted through in places, revealing black earth underneath like the house was slowly sinking back into the hill that birthed it. A single oxygen tank sat beside the door, green paint chipped, hose running inside like a leash. He was waiting in the same rocking chair he'd fallen drunk in the night she ran, only now the wood had silvered and his body had shrunk inside his overalls until he looked like a scarecrow someone forgot to burn. The cancer had eaten him down to gristle and bone, skin hanging loose, eyes sunken but still bright, still sharp, still his. When he saw her standing in the yard between the deputies, something flickered across his face, recognition, triumph, maybe even love twisted inside out. He tried to stand, legs trembling, and the deputy moved to help, but Ruth lifted one hand and the man stopped like he'd hit a wall. 32 years, she said. Her voice carried clear across the yard, steady as the rifle she once carried. You kept Barefoot that long just to see if I'd come back. He smiled then, the same crooked smile she used to see in the dark when he climbed into her bed. Yellow teeth, cracked lips. Blood always comes home, baby girl. Jonah made a sound beside her, low and wounded, but she never took her eyes off the old man. Inside, the house smelled exactly the same, coal oil, mildew, and something sweet rotting she couldn't name. The same battery clock ticked above the same cracked sink. The same iron bed waited in the corner where so many nights had been stolen. Only now hospice papers were scattered across the table and a hospital bed sat where the kitchen table used to be. They set the recorder on the tray beside his morphine pump. The lead detective, a woman with kind eyes and a voice like warm bourbon, read him his rights slow enough for the machine to catch every word. He waved the card away like it was a fly. Won't need that where I'm goin', he rasped. Just want my girl to hear it from my own mouth before the devil gets his turn. Ruth stood at the foot of the bed, hands clasped in front of her like she was at a funeral already. Jonah stayed by the door, arms folded tight, face carved from the same stone as the bluff where he was born. And for the next 47 minutes the old man talked. The tape started with a cough that sounded like gravel poured down a well. Then his voice, thin but steady, filled the room the way coal smoke used to. Start with the night she run, he said, eyes fixed on Ruth. November 17th. I'd been watching her count the days on that feed sack same as I was. Knew the minute she started moving careful. Knew whose it was. He described the cellar like he was proud of the work he'd put into it, the iron ring, the length of chain, how the dark down there got so thick you could chew it. He told how she begged the first night, how by the fourth she only whispered scripture back at him when he read. Ruth never blinked. He told about the money she took, laughed that she only got $23 after all his preaching about the widow's mite. Told how he tracked her 3 days later as far as the creek, saw the blood frozen pink on the rocks, and turned back because the Lord told him she'd come crawlin' home once the belly got too heavy. She didn't, though, he said, almost fond. Stubborn as her mama. Then he told about the cabin. Said he found it in '89 when he was running a bear with the dogs. Saw the smoke curlin' thin and knew. Watched from the ridge with binoculars while she hung diapers on laurel branches and sang to the baby like any other girl. Said he could have walked down and took them both that day, but something stopped him. Figured the hills was punishin' her worse than I ever could. He kept talking. Told where she buried the afterbirth under a lightning-split oak. Told how many teeth the boy lost before he learned to walk quiet. Told about the pink diary with the little brass lock he pried open with his pocketknife the night she left, how he read every page by lantern light and then hid it in a Folgers can under the floorboard because some things a man needs to keep close. Jonah made a sound then, half sob, half growl, but Ruth put her hand on his arm and he went still. The old man's breathing hitched. The morphine was wearing off, pain crawled across his face like ants. Last thing, he rasped. That baby weren't the first. There was one before you ever knew to fight back. Born blue in the Calvin shed, spring of '83. Your mama cut the cord with butcher twine and we planted it under the apple tree out back. Never even gave it a name. Ruth swayed but didn't fall. He looked at her then, really looked, eyes filming with something that might have been tears or just the leaving. I'm sorry, don't cover it, he said. But I'm saying it anyway. You was mine. Still are. Always will be. The heart monitor slowed, stuttered, slowed again. The detective reached to stop the recording, but Ruth shook her head once. He turned his face toward the window where late sun bled through the dirty glass. Lila Mae, he whispered, soft as when he used to call her in from chores. Then the line went flat. The room held its breath for one long second before the machines started screaming.